get into this here. Here we go. All right, well, good evening, Stonecrest. Welcome to our zoning summit for October 12th, 2021. I'm Jim Somerbell. I'm the Planning and Zoning Director. Let me share my screen. Tonight we've got a interesting discussion about different items related to the update to the city's zoning ordinance. As we go forward, let me for those of you that may be on YouTube and want to join us by Zoom, you're more than welcome. This is intended to be an open format. So I've got the Zoom meeting ID down here. It's 879-2088-5235. Again, that's 879-2088-5235. So again, tonight, our intent is to have sort of an open discussion. Of course, we're limited by the abilities of the Zoom meeting itself. So if anyone wants to speak, please raise your hand. And with me tonight, of course, we have Angela Venerable from our communication staff, and then Lillian Lowe, who's also our planning and zoning staff. I'll ask them if they see anyone raise their hand in the group, please let me know. And of course, we can give you an opportunity to ask questions as we go through this. You can also post items, of course, on the chat box. We welcome that as we go through it. And so tonight's agenda, what I'm going to try to do tonight is just kind of go through what's the status of the overall zoning ordinance, where we are in the process of updating it. Also, we want to discuss some of the ongoing amendments that recently were presented to the Planning Commission and get some thoughts and feedback from you all. And we'll also touch upon a few other things, including sort of the standardization of definitions. I also want to bring up the topic of the I-20 overlay design guidelines, and of course, any other items you all want to discuss. This is intended to be an open meeting, so again, feel free to offer any suggestions as we go through. I think everyone on this call has seen this, but it always feels good to try to go back and know why are we doing this. The current zoning ordinance was modified. It was a modified version of the original DeKalb County Code back in 2017. And indeed, since then, DeKalb and the city have both made text amendments, so the two are no longer in sync. But it's important that we kind of, if you're wondering how we got started, where we are, that's how we got started. The intent, of course, is that the zoning ordinance is a tool to implement the vision for the community. And of course, the city recently adopted a 2038 comprehensive plan. What we're trying to do now is try to align that vision with the code, or vice versa, I should say. And of course, shortly after the comp plan was adopted, there were efforts to update the zoning ordinance, and a draft code was offered just this past spring. However, there was a lot of concern because of the pandemic and what was going on and the quickness of it, that there wasn't enough time to really dive into what the details of that update were, and concerns about transparency. So this is really what we're trying to do with the zoning summit, or a series of zoning summits, is trying to give everyone an opportunity to dive more in detail into what's going on. So far to date, there have been 6 text amendments adopted this year with regard to the zoning code. Again, text amendments all have the TMOD prefix on the code. The first couple of them dealt with outdated references to the old comprehensive plan. They dealt with personal care homes, auto service stations. We dealt with removal of an exemption for SLUPs in the overlay districts. We also reestablished car dealerships as a use by right in the Stonecrest area overlays, tiers 1 and 2. And we corrected some of the outdated references or a little bit of housekeeping. Now, MuniCode has been updated to reflect all the changes that have been done to the code through the end of 2019. The only thing that have not been included beside the 6 up here that I'm aware of are the sign ordinance that was adopted in 2020. That's still out there. So we'll go forward with that. Let's see here. There are currently 2 text amendments were presented to the Planning Commission on September 7th that will be presented to City Council on October 25th. The first one's dealing with private permitting pre-qualification, and the second one's dealing with Article 7 administration. The Planning Commission deferred to City Council over the issue of stipends for board members, and we did discuss this with them at the local work session. I guess before I go too much further, does anyone in the crowd have any questions about those two text amendments? I don't know. I know council certainly has already seen it, but anyone else?
Jim, not about that, but the one that was
Mhm.
adopted in 2020 and is not yet in Municode.
Mhm.
Why does the city take so long to get things in Municode? This is the middle of October already.
Yeah, I honestly, that's almost more of a city clerk question than anything else, and it's been a frustration of mine as we go through as well. As you know, for a long time, even the 2018 amendments and 2019 amendments weren't in there as well. So it's
Yes,
honestly,
but that
I'm
was before we had a very efficient city manager and a great staff.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I hate to put anyone in the spot, but I don't know the real details of why it took so long to put in there. Just the complexity of it, I guess, is part of it. Making sure that we have the right signed ordinances that go into it, and of course, working with Munica to do it. I don't know if if the city manager wants to add anything to that, but we are working actively on this issue. And in fact, I was talking with Keija Harris the other day about this, and she's been compiling the documents and stuff. And so I know that before the end of the year, we will submit everything else that's gone through up till now, is my understanding. Do I need anything else to add to that, Janice? Is that your understanding as
Yeah,
well?
I'm sorry, I don't have a complete answer. It seems like when I talked to Kedra last, and Kedra has been spearheading this project, she functions as our office manager, for lack of a better term, because she does so many other things. But she has been our lead person with Municode, and seems like the last update I got from her was that they indicated it would be November when they had everything updated. We have gone through and sought and received council approval to upgrade our Municode package. So I think we're hoping that once we get over this hurdle with putting the old stuff in, that it'll be a quicker process to get everything loaded after that point. So hopefully we'll see some distinct improvements by 2022.
Is it possible you could set a service level goal so we can have an expectation and not have to bug you about things like this?
Yes, that's very
Thank you.
possible.
Yeah, I know even during a regular year, I believe that Municode only updates in packets, and I'm not sure how often those packets are done, but I guess we'll try to find that out as well. I don't know if it's like quarterly or biannually or even annually. I'm not sure. I guess it depends upon your agreement with Municode. So there's always a delay, no matter what. But I agree, it's 2 years is a little long. It shouldn't be that bad. All right. Now there are also 4 other text amendments that were presented to Plan Commission October 5th that will be presented to the council in November, and these will be discussed tonight as well. This is the first one is dealing with special events, temporary outdoor events, late night establishments, and similar uses. The next one, number 10, is uses allowed in industrial districts. And then the next part is steps to mitigate potential conflicts between residential and industrial uses, and then finally gravel parking lots. Now, after that, there's a number of other issues we've discussed off and on. We discussed previously issues about the community council and the Arabian Mountain Conservation Overlay supplemental use provisions. Both those I'm planning to bring to the Planning Commission in November. The community council, of course, is one that we've gone back and forth on, but at least we'll bring it back up. We said we'd bring it up toward the end of the year. And the Arabian Mountain Conservation Overlay supplemental use standards, I've been trying to set up a meeting with the Arabian Mountain Alliance to talk about this, but quite frankly, every time I talk with them, they're very busy right now trying to deal with federal funding and a number of other issues. It's been real hard to try to coordinate with them. Last discussion I had with Kelly Jordan on this was that he kind of gave me the go ahead. Let me go ahead and try to create a draft provisions for this that gives sort of a straw man that we can throw on the table and all discuss. So my intention is to go ahead and draft something up, run it by everybody, anyone who's concerned. In fact, if you're interested in that, and I would think, Arabian Mountain covers about 1/3 of the city. So I think almost any Stonecrest citizen probably would be interested in it. We would welcome any comments in that as we go forward too. And I think that'll be a good discussion next time we get together. Tonight, we're also going to talk a little bit about standardization of definitions. And I also want to bring up the topic of the I-20 overlay design guidelines and just kind of get some thoughts about, what we should do with that. Now, future discussions, and we kind of touch upon these topics a little bit tonight as well, is the Stonecrest area overlay, how to address uses by right, but not in conformance with the base zoning. I actually did a survey the other day, and it was kind of interesting comparing what current base zonings are in there and what's allowed by right. And then, of course, the design guidelines. I mean, one thing we've heard about, or one thing that I've discovered, I should say, since I've been on staff, is that the code doesn't do a very good job, or the overlay, I should say, the design guidelines don't do a very good job of really dealing with residential uses. It's really imposes more of kind of like a what I call an urban form onto the ground. It kind of gives you an idea of trying to create things like street grids, commercial areas, more urbanized areas. It doesn't do a very good job with things like, townhome developments, apartments, you name it, any kind of residential uses that deal with it. And we've actually had a lot of requests recently for things like townhomes and apartments and stuff in the area. So it's been an issue we really need to address. Other supplemental uses, now we've dealt with quite a number of them already, but the idea of micro distilleries, self-storage, and in townhomes themselves, what kind of supplemental uses should we have for that? So these are things that, I would love to get some ideas about. Oops, sorry. Too heavy with my mouse button here. Okay, here we are. And then, of course, clarification of planning commission procedures. We want to make sure that that's real clear about what's done by right. That came up in the last work session. And then, of course, there was special land use permit administration in light of recent court cases. The way that the courts deal with special land use permits is really now quasi-judicial. It's a very sort of technical term, but it's the way that we're really supposed to review them, administer them has changed. And Stonecrest, like a lot of our jurisdictions, have not changed the way they do it. So that's one thing we want to make sure we in line with sort of the new court standards, or say standard procedures. This is, of course, the draft schedule of how we're trying to administer the update. As you see, we're a little past the halfway point right here. Now, again, this is our overall goal, to try to get everything wrapped up, at least where we were with the draft code, that was presented in March, adopted by December. Now, one thing I can tell you, and you probably already realized it, zoning ordinances are living, breathing documents. They're constantly being changed. They're constantly modified. There's a number of reasons for that. One, our court decisions, like we just discussed, state laws that come up and require we do new things, sort of like the private permitting thing we're talking about tonight. And of course, they're just new trends in uses and things like, vape shops, for example. How do you deal with them? How do you deal with hookah lounges? That wasn't addressed like 10 years ago. There's a lot of concern when you have a big glut, or it seems like an apparent glut in the market of new developments coming in for right now, like townhomes are all over the place. How do we address that? How do we do that? So they're always being modified. So even after December, you will have other modifications going on. I don't doubt it. But at least our goal is to at least deal with what was presented in March. And we've already included some other items in there as well that we kind of see that were needed and need to be improved. So that's the overall schedule of where we stand in the process. Are any questions about that before we go on? Oh, we got Renee Keel's got her hand up, I see. Do you have a question or comment? Renee?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. You had a question?
Can you just back up for a minute? I was talking
Sure.
with some people about overlay districts. They don't come to the meetings regularly, but they do every now and then. Overlay districts, we talked about how some of them have protected areas. Could you expand on overlay districts, please?
Sure. Yeah. We talked about that recently. There with the proposal rezoning of expanding the Arabian Mountain Overlay District.
Right.
In fact, maybe I could. Let's see if I can pull up that work session. Let's see here. I had some good slides on that as well. Hold on. If I can find it. Hold on. Well, heck.
Even if you can't find it, maybe later, Another
Yeah.
time, we want the natural resources and our protected areas to remain protected, because some of those areas are the reasons people moved to Stonecrest,
Mhm.
So
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, to give you kind of a basic overview of what we're talking about in the overlay districts, you have your base zoning district, which really determines what you can do on your property. You have residential districts, you have commercial districts, you have misuse districts, industrial districts. And you all have kind of a standard set of what you would expect to do on each of those types of uses. Now, an overlay district is an additional layer of regulation that goes on top of that. And they really can be done for a couple of purposes. One is to be sort of what I call, promotional in nature, to kind of encourage development or economic growth. And the Stonecrest area overlay, for example, is that kind of promotional district. It allows a number of additional uses other than what you can do in the base zone. It also imposes design guidelines and a number of aesthetic controls that kind of give the area a better appearance, so that it's more appealing to people as they come in. And then there's what I call protective overlay districts. And that's the Arabian Mountain Conservation Overlay. What it tries to do is really help preserve, like, for example, the tree canopy, the regulations on how many trees can be clear cut off the property. There's certain uses that, would not feel would be in character with the sort of, nice natural, conditions or character we see out there right now, or anything that might detract from the good views of Arabian Mountain or the nature preserve. So it imposes additional requirements. Again, they're intended to preserve that. So, the recent rezoning that came up, indeed, is talking about expanding the Arabian Mountain overlay and actually removing it from the Stonecrest area overlay. So you're really taking away or I should say, we're trying to preserve the character to be of a higher quality for this area that we're bringing into the Arabian Mountain overlay, so that it's more in keeping with the character, of the nature preserve and the areas around it. So so typically, as I've written overlays, I've administered overlays. I find overlays that deal with the uses directly that have both a permitted and prohibited, like the Stonecrest area, can be problematic. And a lot of the issues you'll see tonight and some of the things we talked about in the past are because of that, because it creates a lot of conflicts, potential conflicts are going on. I like them when they really impose a layer of, say, design guidelines or give you an idea that help to reflect a new character for the area. Those are much easier to administer, like the Arabian Mountain one. So in Stonecrest, we're lucky to have both. We can do both. And of course, we also have the I-20 overlay, which also has some guidelines about the use and character of that, and we'll talk about that tonight as well. So I hope that gives you a little better background. Sorry, I can't find the slides. No, sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the process or where we're going so far from anybody? Okay, we will jump into it then. Let's see here. Okay, special events, temporary outdoor events, late night establishments. This is an issue that I've dealt with quite a bit since becoming planning and zoning director. We get a lot of, one of the things that my department issues are what I call special event or temporary event permits. These are things like festivals, family get-togethers. It can be a music concert. It can be for some charity. Recently the new Black Wall Street had a whole series of these things that came out, to help promote, what they're trying to do, as well as the holidays that they were working around. But the issue that we have is you get places that ask for these, and they tend to do it more frequently than they should. They really kind of end up being sort of outdoor event venues. You also have issues with late night establishments, which really aren't have a license to be a late night establishment. Someone may have a restaurant business license. They may have been in a district that allows restaurants. But however, they end up holding these special events, or they end up just quite frankly staying open later than they should, or they bring in entertainment, and so it becomes really a code enforcement issue, both from a lot of times there's alcohol license issues involved you have to deal with. Sometimes there's noise issues that are involved going on. So a lot of this effort, what we're trying to do in the code is to tighten up the definitions of the terms. And we've been working with the city attorney and trying to make sure that we come up with, terms that they're more enforceable, ones that would, that could be tied directly to what the proper use of that facility, whether it's a restaurant or nightlife social, whatever it should be, so that it's just can be administered better. And a lot of it, quite frankly, is a code enforcement thing, but these definitions and what we're trying to do really make a big difference. One of the first things we're going to do is removal of what we call temporary alcohol permits. It's interesting right now, there's this section 4.2.5. It says any nonprofit civic organization may issue a temporary alcoholic beverage permit for events. Such permit shall have the effect of a license issued pursuant to the provisions of this article. And this is talking about the alcohol ordinance, and shall authorize sale by the drink of such alcohol beverages for the permit. The problem we get into is this is unusual. Like the city of Atlanta doesn't do this. By removing this, it would require that an event that's taking place would actually basically have to hire a caterer. They would have to hire or have on-site, sale of alcohol anyway. It would make it much easier to administer. Honestly, it's just kind of a weird provision to be in there. I assume it's something that maybe DeKalb had originally, but they too have taken it out, is my understanding. So we're recommending removal of that. We've come up with some new definitions. Restaurant will mean an eating and drinking establishment where food and drink prepared, served, and consumed primarily within the building. This is interesting, and just adding the terms eating and drinking, it would help make a differentiation between those who are selling alcohol, those who are doing food and drink primarily. So that's the primary, we're doing that. Of course, we're adding the definition of eating and drinking establishment, meaning those establishments whose primary purpose is to derive income from the sale of food and drink, including malt beverages, wine, distilled spirits, consumed primarily within the premises and without a drive-in or drive-through component, where such establishments are open by use of the patron beyond 12:30. So it shall be incidental there too. So the whole idea again is to make clear definitions, like late night establishments be after 12:30. Entertainment is not the primary purpose of this. Eating and drinking are the primary reasons. And of course, a restaurant is a subset of eating and drinking, where it's primarily based upon food. Nightclubs, we've got a definition of nightclub, or I should say modified it. The old one, referred to a commercial establishment dispensing alcoholic beverages for consumption on premises in which dancing, music, and entertainment were allowed. That's kind of a broad term. So what we've done is we've said a place of entertainment open at night, serving food or liquor, with all booths and tables unobstructed and open to view, dispensing alcoholic beverages in which music, dancing, entertainment is conducted with or without a floor show. Principal businesses of a nightclub shall be entertaining, and serving alcohol beverages shall be incidental there too. Let's see here. We also making the distinction between special event facilities. So these are facilities where you may hire out, say you have a wedding reception or something, or and we're making a distinction between more than 100 and less than 100. There will be some supplemental regulations coming later that I think will make that distinction a little more meaningful and why we're doing that. Whoops, sorry. We'll add definition of smoking lounge. That currently is not in there. And we have had requests for things like cigar bars, seafood lounges, that sort of stuff. So smoking lounge means an establishment which sells tobacco and or promotes the smoking of tobacco products or other substances on premises. The term smoking lounge includes, but is not limited to, cigar lounges, hookah cafes, tobacco lounges, tobacco clubs, and tobacco bars. We revised temporary outdoor events. We've added new requirements for the property owner for temporary outdoor events to have a traffic control plan approved by the fire marshal. And we've also eliminated the limitation on special events occurring just twice a year at any given location, mainly because this is sort of an administrative issue. And also because it limited, groups like New Black Wall Street. They've actually had, I think, 2 or 3 recently. From talking with DeKalb County, they saw no practical reason for the limitation as long as everyone goes through the process. And I can tell you, getting the proper coordination for these things takes at least around 30 days. So just by default, they're going to be limited to how often they can do it. And as long as they follow the established guidelines and everyone, the police are aware of it, the fire, the health department, everyone's aware of it. There's really no reason to limit when they're doing it. And of course, we've added new supplemental use requirements for eating and drinking establishments. We also say eating and drinking establishments also operate as another use. That, for example, you may have be a late night establishment or have some other use on the property. They will have to adhere to the separate parking regulations for both uses to go in there. And smoking lounges, we've added this into it. We didn't have this before. We say smoking lounges shall be subject to the following restrictions. Smoking of hookah in any establishment that serves alcohol or food shall be prohibited. Hours of operation shall not extend past 11 p.m. and will not also serve patrons that are under the age of 19. As we get into that. Any concerns Dave Marcus has his hands up, I see.
Yeah, Jim, is there anything addressing noise problems or preventing noise problems from temporary outdoor events?
Well, that is covered already under the noise ordinance. And of course, anyone that goes in there still has to adhere to that. So we didn't really see a need at this point to change the noise ordinance other than, we just need to make sure that when people apply for these permits and we do let them know, they are subject to what's going on in there. Have you heard of issues, or is there anything in the noise ordinance itself you think we need to address as we get into it? Or is that just something you'd rather we kind of like take a second look at and make sure it's okay?
I hear of issues both with apparent nightclubs and with church services.
Church services. Ooh, that's always a tough one. Regulating churches is always is always a hard spot, I can tell you, for planning department.
New Birth was rocking the neighborhood starting about 7 a.m. one Sunday. And when I say rocking, I'm 1.5 miles from the church. I could hear it. I've read a lot of comments on it about on Nextdoor.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay.
And then
Okay.
there's a club over on Old Hillendale, I believe, that occasionally does events with real loud music. And as far as I know, if you're trying to go to sleep at 1 a.m. and there's a noise thing, I don't know who you call.
Oh, well, it is a police issue and it is a code enforcement issue. So that's my understanding of it. Al's not on the call tonight, is he? That would be an interesting question. That's certainly something I can follow up on. And it's true. I mean, unfortunately, it's the kind of thing that you have to be really quick to respond, because you want to make sure that the police or whoever's there can verify that, this noise level is higher than it should be, So I do admit that's kind of problematic, but I think you've got my understanding is you have adequate noise ordinance in place. It's just more a matter of, like you say, enforcement. How do you make sure that when events occur that you can get to it quickly? Maybe that's something we can, I don't know. I'll ask Al about it and see if maybe that's something you can put on the website. If you hear of noise complaints, notify this person or something like that. So it's a little more obvious for people.
Yeah. Jasmine put in the chat, you call the police.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Personally, I'm not going to call the police on New Birth. I'll let somebody else do that.
Yeah. Well, any church, I mean, I can tell you, it's, that you want them to be good neighbors, that's for sure. But there's some people you want to be friendly with. So this is the supplemental regulations and everything that we're talking about. And we do think this will help a lot in clearing up some of the misconceptions about, when we issue licenses and stuff, and make sure that they adhere to it. My guess is we will probably come back even later with some more supplemental regulations regarding this, but at least this will set the foundation for it with these definitions. Renee, you still have your hand up. Did you just not take it down, or do you have another question?
I need to take my hand.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. TMOD 21-0, or I should say 10. This is one thing that we looked into the code, and it was brought to our attention. We have a lot of inconsistencies in land use terms and stuff, but there are a lot of terms, particularly both for residential and industrial uses, that work for what I call really heavy industrial uses. Now, whether or not they should be allowed at all. We've actually looked at these, and I think the better general consensus is they're really not appropriate for Stonecrest or the character of the community we have. And these include a number of things, which you may even be surprised we even allow in right now. But distillation of bones and glue manufacture, dry cleaning plant, dye works, explosive manufacturer storage, fat rendering or fertilizer manufacturing, fuel manufacturing, incineration of garbage or refuse, landfills, paper and pulp manufacturer, petroleum and flammable liquids, radioactive materials, rubber or plastic manufacturing, thermal treatment of technology or hazardous toxic materials, copper, iron, zinc, or ore smelting, sugar refineries, tire retreading and recapping. So what we've done is we've actually proposed that each of these be added to a prohibited use list. We just won't allow them in the community. I think a lot of us agree. I don't know if any of us would want this anywhere, certainly nowhere near us, but not even necessarily in the community at all as we go forward. Some other things we've talked about is prohibiting some uses in the industrial zones that are kind of inappropriate. And we'll kind of get to this, we'll definitely get to this in the next text modification, where we're talking about trying to make the potential for conflicts between residential and industrial uses less likely, trying to mitigate them. And one of the first things you can do, of course, is to remove the allowance for like mobile homes, multifamily dwellings, the work units, dormitories, hospices, hospitals, that kind of stuff in the industrial zones themselves. But there are also some odd commercial uses are currently out industrial. You've got like pawn shops, check cashing, personal service establishments like barbershops, hair salons, that kind of thing. Alternative energy production that's that includes other things than just clean energy, chemical manufacturing, general aviation, airports, asphalt plants. That they're allowed by right. Maybe they should have a SLUP is required to it. So these are all uses that we're recommending removing from the industrial areas to help mitigate some of those concerns about residential industrial conflicts. And also, there's some uses that aren't allowed currently in there that we're thinking about adding, and that's commercial parking lots, commercial garages in both M and M2, and then of course fabricated metal manufacturing. A lot of this fabricated metal manufacturing, you have these ideas of big pots of iron being poured and stuff, but it's not really the case. They're really a lot of times taking metal bars or stuff, cutting them up, and that kind of thing inside internal to the building, which is really not necessarily loud or causes any issues. Of course, a lot of that, in my mind, comes down to performance measures. How, again, it gets back to the noise ordinance. It gets back to would the kind of manufacturing come up have any kind of outside or smoke, any kind of noxious gases or something need to be concerned about. So those are all concerns that we need, that we certainly want to take into effect. But I think this would go a long way toward helping to mitigate some of these concerns. But Renee, you raised your hand again.
Mr. Somerville, why is asphalt plant on that list? And also, when you talk about commercial parking lots, M and M2, sometimes people look at that as a truck stop.
Well, and you do have truck stops in there, but certainly, in an industrial zone, you certainly could have, sometimes I think probably the best example I ever think are the sort of park and ride lots for the airport, where people will park their cars temporarily and then they'll scoot down to the airport on a shuttle or some kind. Right now, they're not allowed in there. It seems kind of odd to me that they are, particularly when you already have the gravel parking lots that are allowed.
Yeah.
Now, asphalt plant, that is a use that currently is allowed. What we're recommending, of course, is to require a SLUP. Now, the interesting thing is, in the city charter, there's this weird exemption that says industrial uses are not required to have a SLUP in an industrial zone. I think there's probably a good chance that'll be removed, or there'll be attempts to remove that through the city charter coming up. So what we might do is go ahead and modify the code to require SLUP, and of course we can't enforce it until that's removed. It's kind of like, let's go ahead and state our intentions about what we think should require SLUP and not have a SLUP. Okay. So that's one of my concerns in that. I don't know. I see Mr. Knight's on I hate to put you on the spot, but I know you've put a lot of thought about all this effort. Do you have any additional comments or anything about these uses?
Well, actually, sir, I think you've expressed it very well. I do think it's important to say that the Industrial Council is very much in favor of removing all of those uses that you had in the previous slide, the radioactive treatment facility and the glue factory and all that. It's hard to see why they were ever in the code to begin with, and we certainly don't want them there. And I think that is going to go a long way, hopefully, toward reassuring everybody that we do want to work with them to protect the community. And I don't think we have any issues either with the current slide that you have. There are some things that just don't seem to be appropriate for the industrial area. We're very glad to see that the removal of them is being considered. Thank you very much.
Sure. Any other comments or questions about this one before we go on to the next slide?
No, I think.
Okay. All right, great. All right. Well, the next text modification is TMOD 2111, and this is discouraging residential conversion of industrial buildings and residential construction. Planning Commission actually recommended deferral of this at the time, and I can kind of understand why. This is still a topic that's under a lot of study and consideration. In fact, tonight I want to kind of pick your all's brains about this one a little more. And my guess is we'll bring it on to council, but my guess is it'll probably refer back to Planning Commission, but we'll see how it goes. What we're trying to do, of course, is deal with, the elephant in the room is the Metro Green situation. We're trying to eliminate those kind of situations where you have conflicts between residential and then adjacent or adjoining potential industrial uses, or even situations where you had an existing industrial use and residential moved in next door. How do you alleviate that problem that's going on? There are a number of tools that really we can do to address this. So first and foremost is we need to identify and study the areas of potential conflict. And I've got a couple series of maps here I want to talk with you all about and make sure that we understand all the areas where that is the issue. You can also, of course, remove the purpose and intent statements in the code. They encourage residential conversion in industrial areas. Right now, the way the code's written, it almost looks like there's a policy of promoting some kind of conversion of industrial space to residential. And that's certainly something I don't think this is in the best interest if you're trying to eliminate these conflicts. So we've talked about removing that language. Of course, removing residential and unwanted uses from the list of permitted uses in industrial areas. We just talked about that. That's, there's probably, we've added some things to the list, but there may be other things we want to add as well. One thing that I've discovered, and we'll talk about it as well, is right now the Stonecrest Area Overlay Tier 3 allows industrial uses by right. Yet there are no industrial base zones in that entire tier. There have been as far as I know, no interest in adding industrial areas to it. But why do we want to promote industrial areas in Tier 3 if you particularly have like apartments or townhouses or anything that are in Tier 3? That's something to look at. Of course, require transitional buffers, and these don't have to be necessarily natural buffers like along the stream. This can also be a transitional use between residential and industrial. I mean, the most obvious one that people think about are office uses, some limited neighborhood commercial uses, that sort of thing. So we would want to think about what are the proper uses that we would allow in that transitional buffer and how big should that buffer be. And then, of course, reversion of parcels which were zoned from industrial to residential. This is one area in particular. You've got a number of parcels that were once zoned industrial that were then rezoned to residential. However, they didn't really maintain their residential use. They've either gone to industrial use or they've been abandoned. And we'll talk about that a little bit too, but trying to allow for that reversion. And then of course, adding special land use permit requirements for residential uses that want to build next to industrial. And of course, if we get rid of the SLUP exemptions, we may probably ought to do the same going the other direction as well. It's making sure that there's an extra set of eyes looking at these situations where potential conflicts may arise. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do. Now, this is a map I've been working with our GIS department on, areas of potential conflict and what's going on. And I'll zoom in here in a little bit, but the Industrial Council had already identified 6 areas you see up here, these original 6 in the areas that they're most concerned about. But I've gone through and tried to identify other areas that of potential. And I want to make sure that we're capturing all of them so that we can come up with, again, which tool best addresses these areas, or is there somewhere missing? One area, of course, is Metro Green area. You already see over here in number 7. There's this area over here by Covington Highway. There's this area over here, sort of Panola I-20 area. There's these, what I call sort of remnant pieces of industrial all along I-20 over here, Lithonia Industrial Boulevard, that kind of neck of the woods. And then there's an odd industrial one stuck out in the middle of, down here residential. I don't know if that's an issue or not, but I wanted to I'm sure there's a history behind that. And then of course, tier 3, like I said, all of the Stonecrest area overlay allows industrial uses, though none have been in there. In my opinion, we should just take that out of tier 3, say M is not allowed. And there's one little area up here around tier 1, tier 2, that there's a little bit of industrial land as well. So this is kind of zoom in. These are the first original, what I call original 6 that, that the Industrial Council came up with in dealing with their areas. And of course, you've got this area over here in 1 where you do have a good stream buffer that can serve as a natural buffer going along one edge of it. But you have heavy industry and light industry on this side, and you've got residential subdivisions all going over on the west side of the stream. So it's making sure we maintain a good buffer that's going up there. And in fact, even right now, we have a rezoning coming up for a townhouse, single family, kind of mixed residential development right here where that little kind of pink dot is right there in the edge of it. You also have this area right here on the county city border up here in 2, which right now it's industrial on the Stonecrest side, but there's residential on the other side. You've got some large tracts of land up here, or a new subdivision up here in 3 that butts industrial properties. Now the industrial land that's zoned here, honestly, right now doesn't contain any industrial uses. It's fairly wooded, and you see this interesting parcel here that's kind of L-shaped, which I think was originally intended to be a buffer between those areas. Then you have these really large residential areas up here in area 4, which have really large right-of-way rights and stuff. I mean, this is an area where buffers are definitely in place too. And then 5 is this area where you have the situation of reversion going on. You see a few little residential tracts kind of stuck in the middle of the industrial areas. And they were zoned residential. I don't know the history of when that was done. Mr. Knight might know the exact history, but a lot of these uses since then, of course, they're used for industrial purposes or have been abandoned altogether. And then there's areas down here in 6, and this is dealing around Chuck Drive, and there's been a lot of, recently there's been interest in putting senior housing over here. There's been apartments. There's been a number of uses going in. I mean, the character of this road and what's going on is already, for the most part, I wouldn't consider strong res industrial. It's kind of a transitional area for sure, but it's one that we need to think of what are the right uses, or what's the right way to protect the interests of both residents and industry in that area. Before I leave that slide, I know, Mr. Knight, again, you've done a lot of research on that. Anything you want to add to that about those 6 areas?
1 or 2 things I might add, sir.
Sure.
Zone number 2 that you're showing, as well as zone number 1, which has the blue dash lines around it. Zone number 2 has a big stream buffer. That black line that forms the boundary of the city is also Swift Creek.
Okay.
Goes all along that area on the northwest, so that there is a buffer in place from the stream. Zone number 3, it is problematic. We have been working, the Industrial Council has been working with the Homeowners Association there, and we think there are some solutions that can be devised. Zone number 4, there are a lot of protections built in already for the folks who live there. Those parcels were originally light industrial. They were rezoned in 1979. And there were conditions of zoning that were built in to protect any residents moving in, and also to protect the industrial areas from residential encroachment. And they've worked pretty well up till now. Zone number 5 is problematic. Again, that was all of those yellow or residential parcels that you see there were originally light industrial. They were rezoned in 1979. The staff of the county at the time said, this is just not going to work. And it really hasn't. There are 18 parcels that are zoned residential. Fully half of them are either abandoned or are have been converted back to industrial use or just never were built on. We think that there needs to be a holistic approach taken there to trying to help those folks and to try to come up with something that will protect them, perhaps some sort of buyout, but at the same time, make sure that whatever is arrived at is compatible and is they agree to. I think the most problematic zone is zone number 6 down around Chuck Road, Old Hillendale, and Lithonia Industrial Boulevard. Councilman Clanton I think has expressed a thought that there needs to be some sort of wholesale change there. And I don't mean certainly to speak out of turn or put words in his mouth. I do think that there needs to be some sort of overall master plan or re-envisioning for that entire area. We have a growing problem of setting up Metro Green recycling scenarios there as we speak. Things are being built there, which is right next to industrial. And we haven't even seen most of what is slated to be built. So the question is, how do you deal with that? And I don't know the answer. Certainly the Industrial Council doesn't, but what we would encourage the city to do is to come up with some sort of study of that specific area and come up with a vision that everybody can buy into, whether it's, I'm not sure what it would be, whether it's to buy out the industrial areas, to do something to make it consistent with the comprehensive plan. That area right now is slated to be city center, but the things that are going in there, the things that are already there, are by no means consistent with city center. They are not walkable. There's no real pedestrian access, and a lot of other things. So I would say, again, that we need to have a very careful, objective evaluation of that area and a follow through.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, in fact, I was just looking at the future land use map. You're right. That whole area is shown as city center over there. And what we're seeing come in there, it's recently been a lot of apartments and stuff. Industrial really is limited to the north side of Chuck Drive on the future land use map. So interesting.
And I would also point out, if I may, that area does not lie within the area of the projected area of the future Stonecrest Lithonia Industrial Park CID, the industrial CID. That area, actually, everything south of Covington Highway, that's within the East Metro CID.
Okay.
So really, I don't think the tendency, the trend there is toward industrial. The question is, how do you, as gracefully as possible, handle the transition?
Yeah, exactly. And Mr. Marcus, I see you have your hand up.
To add to something that Mr. Knight mentioned, did I hear at one time that you were going to do a map or make a map available online that flagged all properties whose current zoning is inconsistent with the future land use map?
Yes, we are working on that. It's
Great.
You can imagine it's been a lower priority than trying to get the basic stuff done. But no, I still think that is a high priority that we need to address, because part of, there's 3 things you're dealing with. One is what's on the ground today. What's really what I call existing land use, what's on there. The other one is what can you do on the land, which is your zoning. And then the third part is what do you want it to be, which is your future land use map. So ideally, all 3 should be fairly lined up and everything's consistent as you go forward. But what happens is over time, you have rezonings happen. People's visions of what they want to see occur changes. So having misalignments or inconsistencies is always going to be a problem, or, well, maybe not a problem, but an issue that you have to address in some form or fashion. So, Mayor, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Somerville. I appreciate it. Just want to give a little bit of input here as I listen to some of the things that are happening here. One thing that I think that even the general public is confused about with regards to the comprehensive plan. There are things that are designed and written in that comprehensive plan that will never happen. And one of the things that I know that will never happen in that spot is it's city center right off the interstate. I gave that input early on, but nobody really paid me any attention when I was telling them our future city center would be the center of Stonecrest, off of Mall Parkway, which would be the Sam's Club building, and in that area. So what's down there near Chubb Road off the interstate access area, that would be fine, in my opinion, for light industrial, for warehousing. People disagree with that, and that's fine. But as for developing a city center there, that will never happen. People won't put in the tax dollar for it, and they don't have the vision for it in that area. But as a city center in here, in the city of Stonecrest itself, I envision it to be near where we've already purchased and have property, which is up near and around about the mall area and area.
You're breaking up there, Mayor. Are you? I think we're losing his connection.
Correct commercial traffic is.
I think we're losing your connection, Mayor, but I think you were basically saying that you saw the city center more around the Sears. I mean, not Sears, the Sam's Club area, this area around the mall, more than over here by the highway, if I got that right. I think we've lost this connection here. Mr. Marcus, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would like to ask you, Jim, if you could comment on the difference between a city center and a regional center. The mall area, which is all the way at one edge of Stonecrest, and which is surrounded by the lowest density residential we have, is nowhere near the physical center. It's nowhere near the place that people go back and forth on their daily routines. If you just look at a map of the city. But that's marked as a regional center, yet we have several city centers allocated in future land use in other places. What really is the difference between those, in your view?
Well, I would have to dive heavily into the comp plan and get super familiar with it. But my gut reaction is that a regional center is just that. It is the center for regional activity. It's a draw for people from all around the metro region, as typically a regional mall is. You know, it's bringing in tourists, it's bringing in people that want to see what's going on. So in many ways, it may serve as the, you know, kind of the ceremonial center for the city, what's going on. The city center itself, I kind of view as being more of an urbanized area, an area that's walkable, that's got all the amenities that you would typically see for around, you know, the center of the city that's going on. I do think it's unusual to have something like that on I-20. Now, I imagine the idea is that I-20 is kind of like the main street of the city, and it's probably what's most visible for everyone coming in and out. But, you know, another observation I have is, quite frankly, the scale of Stonecrest. I mean, this is a large area. In fact, one thing I might do maybe next time we meet is kind of show you, compare, for example, what is a perimeter center or a downtown Atlanta or even smaller cities, Decatur or whatever, what does their footprint of a center or urbanized center look like in relationship to the size you're seeing here? These are huge areas that you've got here. I kind of think the regional center and the city centers are all, quite frankly, too big, just from my gut feeling of it, though. You know, and maybe it's just we're using the wrong terms. Maybe a better terminology would be in place for something like that. But my gut feeling is that the city center should be more of a center of, like I say, activity, what's going on for more community residents of what's happening, as opposed to this regional center, which is bringing everybody in from all over the place.
That would be a great subject for a future zoning summit to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, and I totally agree. I mean, I think the vision for the, you know, I agree with the mayor's comments about, you know, we should always look at the vision there and see if it doesn't reflect what we really think ought to be there. You know, there's nothing wrong with revisiting your comp plan from time to time, and this is where the rubber meets the road. You know, is it allowing or promoting the right kind of development you want to see happen in the area? So there's nothing wrong with thinking about it. And of course, state law requires you update it at least every 5 years. It's a short-term work program, what's going on in there. So,
you know, I agree to be looked at and updated, and maybe we're getting a little too editorial here, but until it is updated, I think the city government is duty bound to follow it.
Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, it is the vision.
Anything else.
Right. Well, it's what I look at when I make rezoning recommendations. Of course, it's up to the city council to make the decision, but that's what we as staff look at when we make recommendations. And that's you know, that's backed up totally by the law and the courts. You know, that's what they expect us as staff to look at.
And I just want to mention, while I-20 seems odd for a city center in some ways, but when you look at some of the land, say Lithonia Industrial just south, that's
Mhm.
that seems like perfect city center. But I think things are clustered around I-20 a little bit because I-20 is, it's not our main street, but half of us is north of it, half of it is south.
Yeah.
You know, it's we want city centers where we can come together as a city and start to build character as a city, not as groups of neighborhoods. So maybe that's good reasons, and I'll shut up now for a while.
It is your main gateway. I mean, that's when people think of the city, that's what they look at. You know, they're driving down I-20 and whatever image you're portraying along there, that's what they're going to take away, you know.
Yeah. Plus, we've always
Whenever
said, I think, that density of development would generally start at I-20 as very dense and then work out. So, but I don't disagree with the mayor about whether that site, given what the planning commission and council have allowed to be done to it, whether that area is still suitable. I think that's a great question.
Yeah, it's always a good question. All right, I'll go on to the next one. Go back to my other slide here. Let's see. Okay. All right, here's the areas in the northwest of Stonecrest that what I asked GIS to do is they went in and they identified anywhere where residential zones were adjacent to industrial zones. And they highlighted these kind of black lines going on here. Now, a couple of these I realized were not problematic. Like this one right here in the center, there's one little residential R100 piece at the corner over here that if you go on Google Maps, drive by, you may be more familiar, but right now it's a vacant lot. I don't think any residential will be developed there. So that in my mind is really not an issue. I know this conflict up here between zone 7 and 8, that's a daycare center going on up there next to industrial. It's already what I call sort of a transitional use. So I don't think that is a real serious issue. Now 7 here, of course, is Metro Green. This is the site we talked about. And a lot of the residential conflicts really are not in the city itself, but in the neighborhoods just across the street. Now, one thing that GIS is still working on, and one I would love to get the input from, you know, all of you here on the call, is where the conflicts exist along the boundaries. Like when I just looking at the layout of the street grid here, I can tell there's residential neighborhoods down here, you know, south of what is it, Snapfinger or whatever over here. I'm sure this area is probably an area of conflict. You know, what other areas along the edges are we not capturing and what's going on? But, you know, so 7, of course, Metro Green sites, one I realized. 8 over here has got some interesting industrial pieces along here and some R100 kind of odd shapes around here. I'm not familiar with that area that well. I'm curious what people think if that's a potential spot for issues. Down here at 9, these areas, quite frankly, I don't think are going to be a big issue because there are really a lot of remnant industrial pieces down in 9. This area over here, I know there's like a crematory and there's a church over here, and I believe some senior housing. I think these industrial pieces are kind of remnants left over. I don't really think they're likely developable. This one over here, I know is a vacant industrial tract, I believe, south of 20. These areas over here, a lot of them I understand includes the fact that a cemetery, I believe, is over here, and a couple of other uses. And of course, the residents around them aren't really single family. They're more like apartments and that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure 9 is a real issue of concern, but I'd love to get some feedback. And then 10 over here, you know, the Miller Road area, there's a lot of what I call sort of light industrial distribution off of 10 here. And of course, you got subdivisions right backing up to. I imagine this would be a potential area of conflict going in here, but I will open up the floor for any comments or concerns or anything going here. I see Mr. Knight, get your hand up.
Yes, sir. 2 points. As far as the area number 7 and number 8, I believe both of those were included in a study which was done by the Urban Land Institute several years ago for the East Metro CID. And, and the ULI had some excellent recommendations, in my opinion, about what could be done to try to start getting the residential community together with the industrial community and avoid things like unfortunately subsequently happened with Metro Green recycling. I think there's still good recommendations, and it would be great if at some point in the future the city and the residents could engage with that community, and especially the East Metro CID, to try to come up with some ideas about how to prevent future problems. One little thing down here in number nine, down south of I-20,
Mhm.
a little piece of industrial. That actually is borders on what was one of the first planned communities, certainly in DeKalb County. It was called the Metropolitan Country Club, and it dates back to the 60s. And the
Wow.
north-south road that this industrial strip of land is on was originally a golf path for the golf course, and somehow
Wow.
converted over into an actual public right-of-way. I have never been able to find out, though, why that was an industrial piece of land placed right there on an isolated basis.
Interesting. Okay. Anyone else? I know council members, you probably know more of the history of this area than anybody else. Do you have any comments about, have we identified the right tracks, or are there any other things we need to add?
Actually, I would think that Bernie Knight know more about historically about this area than anybody else, to be honest with you. Between
All
him and Jordan Kelly.
The Godfather. He knows a lot more than I do.
Thank you, Clarence, Jimmy.
But do you have any comments, Kelly, about all this?
I would defer to Mr. Knight when it comes to the industrial area, of course.
Okay. All right. All right, well, I'll look at that ULI study. I think that would be a good start to look at that. And like I say, I'm going to look real closely, particularly at what the existing land uses are in each of these areas, and try to see if we can come up with some solutions of what's happening there now. But so it sounds like you all kind of agree. 9's kind of on the edge because of remnant pieces. I mean, there's still concerns about what might happen there, but the big concerns, of course, are 7 and 8, and I think 10. Honestly, I'm curious what, you're backing right up against some subdivisions there, and I'm curious if there have been any complaints or concerns from the residents around there. Renee, you have your hand up?
Yes, I don't see, can you tell me where you have Evans Mill and Salem Road on this map?
Oh, that's on the next map.
Oh, okay.
That's
Okay. All
but,
right.
well, here, I'll just go ahead and go over to it. How about that? I'll show you.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, I mean, the areas here on the east side of Stonecrest, I mean, again, tier 3 allows uses in the M district by right in there. And I think should be a concern, at least it is to me. I mean, I would recommend that we take that provision out of tier 3. But again, I wasn't around when you guys crafted the Stonecrest area overlay. I'm curious about, was that a conscious decision, or is it just sort of unintended consequence of what happened? If anyone wants to comment on that. Mr. Knight or Renee, either one, you both have your hands up. Renee, do you want to talk first?
Oh, I was just concerned about Salem Road and Evans Mill because there's some commercial property over there that's zone C1 in the middle of a great amount of residential areas. And then you have part of the Arabian Mountain. There's a nature trail over there with a large stream. So that's could be a conflict because you don't want to put something commercial over there. There's too many streams over there.
Yeah, well, of course, it depends on the nature of the commercial too. I mean, I was recently at the Georgia Planning Association conference last week, and I saw an interesting discussion about trail-oriented development. Making sure that the commercial uses along a trail are, adhering to the needs of, say, bicyclists or pedestrians that are going along there. You have your bike shops, your yogurt shops, your, heck, I don't know, Dr. Scholl's shops, I don't know. But having uses that would be an attraction to people that are on the trail or going along there, So I don't think commercial by its very nature is necessarily bad, but it's the type of commercial that you allow there. I think it's a concern.
Well, I think that for me I'll just, we can do some more research and look at it even more closely.
Okay.
But
Bernie,
thank you.
You had your, sure. Bernie, you had your hand up? Oh, you're on mute, sir.
I wanted to speak to the fact that Tier 3 of the Stonecrest overlay has an M as an allowed use.
Uh-huh.
This is the first time I've ever heard that. I had not noticed that before. I just verified it's in Muni Code. How it got in there, I don't know. I was on a member of the committee, of course, that proposed revisions to the overlay. I will tell you, nobody ever discussed that. And if they had, they would have left out of the room. How that got there. But
okay, so as far as you know, it's an unintended consequence.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's consistent with that other strange thing that we've seen that apparently crept in at some point afterwards, which was banning car dealerships.
Yeah.
I don't think that was ever intended to be in there either, but how it got in there is a mystery. And I would say how this allowing M in Tier 3 is just mind-boggling.
Okay. Well, that's what I like to say. I just want to make sure I wasn't stepping on someone's toes, or if there was some good reason why it was there. But and then 11, I see there's a little industrial tract out there. I looked at an aerial and I really couldn't tell much from it. What is that? Some remnant industrial, like an old gravel pit or something that's going on there? Anyone know? Is it a concern? No one knows. Interesting. Okay. I thought for sure there'd be some great history behind that one that people could tell me about.
Jim.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me, but with your map, it's hard to follow the streets and the exact location because there are no names. It's not blown up.
True. Yeah. Well, no. Well, I don't think GIS offered me street names as we're going in there. Yeah. This area over here. I think it's Wade Road, if I believe it's going off of there. In fact, this is not far from. Don't you live off of Rock Springs?
Yeah, and Wade Road. I think there used to be a quarry there. I think Mr. Jordan Kelly.
Yes.
Give you some history on that.
Yeah, Wade Road, of course. Road, comes in from Evans Mill and runs kind of south. And it used to traverse right over some rock, and then it emerges on Rockland Road. But right now you can't drive through there. And there was a gentleman many years ago, Leonard Sullivan from Lithonia, who planned and attempted to open more of a rock quarry there, but the property in question was acquired by DeKalb County for green space instead.
So this is owned by DeKalb County right now?
Well, you'd have to zoom in close to be sure you knew exactly which part of it, but yes, the area that was going to be a rock quarry.
Okay, and then, good. Well, I'll do some research, and yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then that should not be an issue.
I'll give you the appropriate map.
Okay. Great.
He challenged. He sued DeKalb County to have his zoning made industrial, and DeKalb denied it. And then he sued DeKalb County in court, and he won in court, but it was subsequently acquired for green space, which makes the whole thing moot.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, good. Well, hopefully it is a moot point and we can just take it off of our concern list. The last one over here is Area 13. There's a small area right close to the Rockdale County line where you have some industrial properties right against I-20 right away and that access road that goes along there. And I know there's been recently some interest in building some apartments, some workforce apartments on part of this property. And of course, a lot of what you see there, it is for more multifamily. So I don't know if this is an area that's really too much of a concern, but I just wanted to flag it and see if anyone had any thoughts about that area as well.
Yeah, I think you have the power lines there as well as the is it Georgia Department of Transportation have their outpost right there? Yeah.
Yeah, they're right here where my cursor is right here. They're on this track.
Yeah, exactly. And then and then there's that the one development that's wanting to put down some apartments along that area as well.
Yeah, just north of here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure it's a real concern, but that is a few left.
But there is a gravel company back there somewhere too, I think. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I know between, it's on the access road between the car dealership and that first set of apartments in Haynes Park.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, but that wouldn't, I don't see where that would need to be industrial. No, I don't know.
Okay. Okay. All right. Renee, you have your hand up again, or you just leave it up?
I need to lower it.
Okay. No problem. Yeah, we all are Zoom challenged at one point or another at any call, I think. All right. Well, those are the areas identified. Am I missing any? Oh, Mr. Turner. Yes.
Now, I'm just going to go back to the same item that Councilman Clanton just mentioned. I think that's where the original Stonecrest is. But to his point, there are some high transmission power lines, and I didn't know what the rule was in terms of development beneath those lines, or is that something that is prohibited? Because there's so much of this space is occupied with that until it almost takes up, I wouldn't say the majority of it, but quite a bit of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that could very well be. This will be another one. We'll look closely at the existing conditions and see what it could just be that, again, these are remnant pieces that really aren't going to cause an issue. That's what it sounds like to me, particularly with the power lines. Yeah.
And some of these smaller pieces, I think we're going to have to look at if we actually transferred from DeKalb County what was really intended to be, because we found some errors with some of the labeling. I'm not sure if it happened before it was transferred or after. I think some of it occurred with the updating of the DeKalb County's codes in 2015, but that explains some of it. What I would look at is the corner of Salem and Evans Mill, where we have acquired a commercial piece of property, but we haven't rezoned it yet. So that kind of stuff needs to be taken care of. But the original zoning that put it in a condition of commercial, I think may have been the vision of some of the farmers that own most of this land and also sat on the Board of Commissioners. And it was envisioned, I think, that you'll have a residential development and you can walk to the corner and transact a little business on the corner with, in some cases, it may have been intended to be a convenience store because I don't think there was any real emphasis on protecting the river. The river had no place. A park had no place in terms of, I mean, I won't say no place, but it didn't have the importance that we embrace now with the river and our parks, because it just didn't have the same importance, I think, to those who were in power to preserve it. That was not on the agenda. So now our agenda has changed. So it goes to the point that it's time to take a look at it differently. Just want to throw that in.
Yeah, and you brought to my attention several places on the map where, there's questions of whether or not these were almost like to use the term mappos,
Yes.
It's a mistake in mapping that was done, and whether intentional or not, we have adopted this zoning map, and so it could very well be that we might need an effort to correct some of these things in upcoming, city initiated rezoning. I think that is certainly appropriate if the map is not reflecting what residents, homeowners, property owners think their property really is, or should be. So I do think it's something we probably should address. All right. Any other comments about this? So are there any other areas I've missed? I mean, have we hit all of them? Renee, you have your hand up again, or no? Okay.
I have one more question. Have you dealt with telecommunications issues, cell towers?
Not here too much. I've only had one inquiry recently about a potential cell tower around the mall area, but we quickly dissuaded them that there really weren't too many places they could locate. I think they're searching, but who knows? most communities I work with, they're usually, I mean, I call it a lightning rod zoning issue. You bring up the issue of cell tower and everyone in the neighborhood will come out and complain. Of course, they'll also complain they don't have good cell coverage. But they don't want the tower in their backyard. So, yeah, but I'm not sure. It's the nature of your question. Have I seen telecommunication issues here, or have I dealt with that as a topic? I have dealt with the topic in other places, but not here in Stonecrest yet.
Okay, I was just curious because I was concerned about 5G and then putting towers in front of the houses. The radiation from those cell towers is extremely dangerous for children, especially. So I was just curious.
Yeah, like I say, I've always found it to be a very lightning rod issue. You know, people want good coverage, but they don't want it near them. And of course, there have been a lot of efforts in the state legislature recently to kind of preempt local control over these things too. So even if, when 5G comes in, I think our hands are tied to some degree by the state legislature on what we can or can't do with regards to cell towers. But we'll certainly, do what we can as we go forward.
And Mr. Somerville, I would say that we should probably, if we know where our hands will be tied at, we may want to distribute, disseminate that information as soon as possible. Place it on our website, because it don't become an issue until it is an issue. But at least if we have the information out there, the public can, have some, level of expectations. And they have also an opportunity, if they feel that there's recourse that they can make on behalf of citizens and homeowners, that they know who to attack and where to go to make their case. Particularly, state legislature or federal government or local governments.
Yeah, no, good point. Yeah, like I say, there have been a number of bills recently, I know, either proposed or passed. So yeah, we can do a better job of informing the public about that issue.
I have some information if you want it. I can send you some.
Okay.
That might be helpful for the public. I think it would be very helpful. But that's, just my opinion. Okay.
All right. Okay, so that gets to the point of identifying these areas. Like I say, we've got a number of places, and I think our challenge now is to make sure we understand the issues in each one and come up with a list of tools to deal with it. Like the first one I mentioned is removal of language encouraging residential conversion to M, and this is something we've already proposed. The current language that's in there does specify. Here it is. In fact, let's see. Well, maybe I don't have it in here. But basically, there's language in there that says to allow the conversion of industrial buildings to residential multifamily uses in the M district, and it's also in the M2 district. So we've gone through the text. We've actually highlighted where that is and recommend deletion of those provisions as they go in there. Here's the M2 statement of purpose and intent. Let's see here. Again, making sure that conversion of buildings to residential uses are prohibited. There was also some concern about the language dealing with noise. I think right now it's got a very broad statement about any negative noise impact. We're thinking about changing that to unreasonable noise impact. Again, it gets back to your noise ordinance and whether or not you all think the noise ordinance is doing an adequate job of protecting, the sound levels in your neighborhoods. If that's the issue, I would rather address it through the noise ordinance than address it here in the zoning code itself. Let's see here. Transitional buffers. Now, this is an interesting concept that's come up. Mr. Knight, you had and Renee, you both have your hands up. Do you have questions about that last part? You're on mute, sir. Or Renee, well, you both are.
No, I took my hand down.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, as far as the noise ordinance goes, there was some concern about the use of the word any, because it really is not defined very well. If we could have something like a decibel figure that
will actually state, okay.
Yeah, something that would be defined so that everybody, both the residents and the industrial area, knows exactly what the standard is that they should not transcend. That would be,
okay.
I think that would be far preferable and might avoid this, the concern.
So we could add a definition about what's reasonable. And I'll look at the noise ordinance. I imagine you already have a definition in there concerning decibels, but we'll double check that. Yeah.
Okay, good, thank
Jim,
you.
I looked at that a little earlier, and there is
Oh,
excruciating detail on decibels and how and where it's measured and what the definitions are of various technical terms in the measurement process.
Well, then perhaps,
But by the way, the noise ordinance does not apply after 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. with a couple of small exceptions.
I would,
uh,
I would say, Mr. Somerville, that it would be good, first of all, to incorporate by reference the noise ordinance into this industrial ordinance. And that's
Okay.
some consideration definitely ought to be given to making some sort of decibel restriction apply during the hours that the noise ordinance doesn't cover. I mean,
yeah.
want people to have to listen to that stuff in their neighborhoods between the hours of 7 a.m. and whatever. Mr.
Right.
Murphy, taken.
Good point. So we don't have like say, the rocking churches at 7 a.m. in the morning.
You don't want to have
causing issues
in the prohibition.
All right. Okay. And I guess that also goes true too that what we talked about earlier with the late night establishments. We probably need to make sure that there are good references to the noise ordinance there as well. Make sure that's in place. Transitional buffers, and this is something that we tend to think of buffers as being a natural buffer with, landscaping. You have your undisturbed buffers, which are just basically trees. You have your landscape buffers, which you have your nice rows of trees and understory trees and other plantings. Then you have your enhanced buffers where you may have your landscape buffer with a fence on one side. But there's also transitional buffers dealing with what's a good transition in uses from one use to another. And this is the thing I think is going to be the challenge in drafting up this part of the code is what do we mean by transitional buffers and what should the width of those be? Typically, the more intense the buffer you're dealing with, like an enhanced buffer as opposed to a landscape buffer, usually the narrower they can be. The more natural buffers tend to be broader. And of course, when you get to transitional uses that need to go in there, I think we need to think about what are appropriate transitional uses. I'm curious, does anyone have any thoughts? Like if you had a neighborhood and you have an industrial use and say it's a football field's length away between the two uses, what kind of uses would you want to see in between there that would be appropriate and might serve as a good buffer between that? I mean, the most obvious thing I think of are office uses that go in there or like maybe neighborhood commercial, but I'm open. What kind of uses would you all see appropriate as transitional between those two residents and industry? Any thoughts?
Well, I like green space,
No?
more on the natural
Like a park?
side. That's, so that could be a great space buffer, as well as office parks. But the other type of buffer, as you continue to talk about the buffers, Ms. Renee Kelmack can chime in on this better than I can, is that a buffer that would protect not just noise and not just looks and the like, but also odors, harmful odors, and even odors that you cannot smell that may be harmful. So I don't know how we address those in our ordinances, I know there are some EPA concerns that certain, industrial uses have to adhere to, as in the case of Metro Green. But, there still has to be some, I don't know what we can do locally that will provide a level of protection for our communities in regards to, the not so obvious items that need to be buffered.
Yeah, it's almost like a noxious gas ordinance or something that's dealing with those pollutants that you don't necessarily see or what's going on. And again, it gets into the question of, well, how do you measure it? How do you know what's going on? How do you control it? But sure, Renee, I see your hand up this time, and I'm sure you do have something to say about this.
I was just going to say, in response to Councilman Clanton, it's extremely difficult, especially if you discuss Metro Green. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of that, but if you talk about what people go through who live in areas with industrial facilities in close proximity, it's a nightmare. So in this proposal, it says add new section to impose an undisturbed transitional buffer zone of 150 feet. That's still pretty close. So how does that really, and the question is that I have, how does that really protect the residents? Even when you talk about noise ordinances and the decibel levels, the people, when they start working in these facilities, they don't really take into consideration the devastation that people experience. So to do something to protect them, I'm not even sure. I mean, I'm sure more dialogue would need to take place and creativity and, you know, some more research, but it's extremely difficult. And then we have new chemicals, new pollutants that are emerging, like dioxane, which you probably have never heard of. They call that a forever chemical. In North Carolina, it's in their water. They don't even know how to get it out. So I think with more thought, more thinking, you know, more research and people coming together, there must be a solution somewhere. But I think that further away the industries are, the better.
Right. Right. Yeah. Obviously, the further away and the more protections you have in place, I think the better off you are.
Yes, definitely. So I'm glad it's being looked at anyway. I'm glad it's being addressed.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point too. It may be like baby steps that we're taking, at least imposing these, 150-foot buffers. And of course, again, you already have a buffer requirement on industry next to residential. But the issues we often have is when an industry's already been there and an industrial property has been rezoned to residential. Well, all of a sudden, there needs to be a buffer in place, and typically residents, you don't put that imposition on the residents. But if there is no buffer in place, it definitely is worthy of putting something in place between those two uses, because you can't go back to the old industry and say, hey, you need to now add a buffer because some residents came next to you. So it's a tough call, but I think both looking at it closely from as requesting SLUPs, and also making sure that new residential that comes into next to adjacent or existing industrial probably should add a buffer. I think it's a good call. I know, Mr. Clanton, you had your hand up just a while ago. Do we lose him?
Yeah, but I think you pretty much hit on what I was going to say, because I think by and large, the ultimate protection for residential is a total separation of industrial parks from residential communities, provide a big enough buffer so that whatever happens within their industrial park area, we don't have to worry about, the names of these chemicals that are in the air or the noise that may be caused by those. So I think we should have a thriving industrial park area. And I do think that we should put some distance, however, between the industrial park and nearby residences. And so the problem that we have here in Stonecrest, however, is that, we do have those abating lands, properties where you have industrial and residential within 300, feet of each other in some cases. And I don't know what we can do about that, because I don't want to harm anybody, but, when I think the ultimate protection factor is, what do we do to prevent harmful or environmentally unsafe elements, particles, or whatever? How do we keep that from our communities? And so, I agree with Ms. Kale that we probably just need even more conversation on a local level about that. That might even be a commission or a committee that could, that could be put together to actually, talk and work with, even include people from the industrial park, as well as, community advocates and, and environmental advocates. So we can come up with something, Stonecrest, that may actually be a model for the rest of Georgia.
Yeah, good point. Good point. So so transitional buffers are something you consider. Another one that was alluded to earlier that Mr. Knight talked about, and I mentioned here, is the reversion of parcels which were zoned from industrial to residential. And again, if you go down that street that was that we talked about where this was occurring, was that zone? I'm sorry, was it zone 5? Is that right, Bernie?
Which one is that, sir?
Was it zone 5? Is that where the reversions are that you had shown?
Oh, Maddox Road.
Maddox Road. There you go. Thank you. I was trying to remember the road, the names and everything. But, you see some examples of these older houses or abandoned lots are in there. And, about half of them, like I say, are that way. Now, what we're talking about doing is including a reversion clause in situations where we know they're abandoned or we know they're using for industrial uses. We're not saying we would rezone properties that have an active residential use and someone's living there. I don't think that'd be the right situation to do that. But certainly in these situations where they've been abandoned, I think the city should, take steps to probably revert back to industrial property. And then the SLUP requirements for residential, again, this would be the idea of requiring a SLUP permit for any new residential adjacent to industrial, and trying to make sure that at least another set of eyes, another set of hearings is in place so that people look at it closely and understand what's going on. And some of this too in dealing with residential. I mean, we were talking earlier about the idea of what kind of notice should be on plats, or when people buy a property, are they even aware of this industrial land next to them and that kind of thing. I don't know what we can do necessarily, but it's certainly something, getting the notice out so that people are aware of what the potential, because what may be next to them now is a vacant lot, but if it's zoned industrial, they may not be aware that potential could occur. And then SLUP requirements for industrial. Again, right now that those are precluded in our city charter, but that may go away if efforts to remove that exemption take place. So we probably need to consider going ahead and adding some sections requiring that in kind of anticipation of that going on. And I think there was a number of good, what I call kind of conditions, location conditions. If there's a 150-foot undisturbed transitional buffer in place along the border, or if the property is separated by a stream. So if there are already some buffers in place, maybe a SLUP is not required. But at the same time, if they aren't in place, we certainly should require them as we go forward. So those are the steps we talked about and trying to make, we're talking about now and trying to make sure that are making steps to make sure that residential industrial conflicts don't take place in the future, or at least we can help mitigate the potential impacts that are going on. And so as we all agree, I think it's going to take a little bit more study, but there are certainly some recommendations I think we could go ahead and make toward improving that, including the clauses about encouragement of conversion, dealing with the uses that we talked about, and I think we can even go ahead and probably insert some of this about the reversion clauses and stuff as well. So that's going to be part of our proposal that we're looking at as we go forward. All right, the next one we're dealing with is the gravel parking situation. As you know, a couple of years back, the city adopted a gravel parking lot ordinance that really addressed this issue of, that trucks are required to only spend so many hours on the road. They have to basically, after a while, park their vehicle and then move on. But a lot of situations, and this is something that I think all over Metro Atlanta we've seen. I know when I was working out in Douglasville, they dealt with a lot of truck parking issues. I know that I saw that up in Chamblee and stuff. So it's not just Stonecrest to deal with it. And Stonecrest kind of took a giant step forward in allowing these to be gravel truck parking lots. Now, there've been some concerns over this recently about the appearance of them, particularly the fencing requirements and the tree buffers and how well they're maintained. I've been talking with staff about, what issues have they run into and trying to make sure that these gravel parking lots are built to the standards that are in the code. One thing they brought up, and it's something I haven't discussed with outside of staff right now yet, but is, one possibility is this maybe requiring the property owner to hire a third-party reviewer or inspector, and maybe have the owner issue or submit annually kind of a maintenance report on what it looks like and what kind of issues are on there. Because I know right now, according to what I've talked with code enforcement and to our building inspectors, they say it would take a lot of effort, at least another staff person probably, just to look at these on a regular basis and include it in their efforts. So they've thought about, what about the possibility if we add a requirement that the property owner potentially offers, an inspection and submits that to the city. So I'm curious, Mr. Knight, I see you had your hand up real quick on that. What are your thoughts about that? Oh, you're on mute, sir.
I'm trying it most of the time. Back when the when the current version of the gravel parking ordinance was being negotiated in 2018, we actually, the industrial community actually raised the idea of having staff come out and do periodic inspections, just as a matter of routine, to ensure conformance with all the requirements. What we were told then was, and I think that's really kind of consistent with what you just said, was that staff just did not have the person power, did not have the resources. It was just asking too much. So that idea was dropped. The evolution of that idea, I think, is what you just said, which is, yeah, we should have a periodic inspection requirement, but put the burden on the property owner. And actually, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe we'll
it needs to be
we'll
done.
draft something up and see what and run that by everybody and see if that works. But I think it would help alleviate some of the staffing concerns of what I've been hearing, but also get to this whole issue. It needs regular maintenance and look at it.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Attention to it. And this is a map that was done up this summer that shows at least 12 lots that we know of. I know we've got a lot of people here on the call that are very familiar with the area. I know there are a couple others we're not showing right now on here that we proposed. I think there's one off of Varkle. We recently had a request for a potential annexation off of Lithonia Industrial that would include a truck parking area. So I know there's at least 2 others up here that we could almost add dots to. And of course, there are a number of what we consider sort of illegal lots, I think, that are kind of going on, So, this again is kind of our efforts to make sure we kind of monitor these. If you know of any other lots or going out there, I'd love to make sure that we map them and are aware of them. Councilman Clanton, so you have your hand up.
Yes, sir. So, first of all, I'll start with the last thing you talked about is the legal lots. I think that we should move immediately to, basically shut that down. I mean, there's no reason I see that we can't. So if it's illegal, it shouldn't be operating. There's no grandfathering. There's no case for that to continue to happen. As far as the lots that are legal and that are not conforming are, I think we should. I do agree with putting the burden on the lot owners. I have no problem with that. That's a good thing. If you write something up, I would like to see what the timetable is going to look like, because I don't. Hopefully, this is something we won't project into the future, but something that will be rather easily and quickly moved upon. Because there are quite a few that are not compliant. There are some that don't even have the proper amount of gravel based on what we agree with initially. And that's not even talking about the look. So, and I don't know who would be equipped to investigate that and to make certain that is up to par based on our zoning or based on the ordinance. But that, I hope, is something that we can get done rather quick, sooner than later. Let's put it like that. But I don't think there's nobody in the industrial park, because I'll put it like this. I think that ordinance and that whole process was well intended. I think everybody came to the table with a grand idea. We wanted to provide a way for truck parking to happen in the city of Stonecrest without being at an exorbitant amount for these truck parking owners. We just wanted, when a regular normal citizen drive through the industrial park or wherever these truck parking lots exist, that they would barely even know that there's a truck parking lot right there. So that's why we wanted the buffer in the zone and the trees. So we do have some good players. And I'm not saying every one of these are out of compliance, but there are quite a few that are.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, I'll say presentation is everything, and I absolutely agree with Councilman Clanton on that. How it looks when people pass by and the optics that they have, and that's their impression of Stonecrest. And so we do things. We have to make sure it is our brand, no matter who's responsible for it. If it's in Stonecrest, then let's just make sure we have our eyes on it. So I absolutely agree with Councilman Clanton about that.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem, you have your hand up?
Just to add support, there was a time I was against these parking lots, period, and particularly against truck stops. But come to realize they're a great part of who we are as a city, and they're so vital to our function and operation. And we just have to make sure that they're done in a tasteful manner. And I do support the gravel parking lots as long as it is strongly regulated. And I think that's where we're going with this, to make sure we have regulations in place such that they will function well and will be aesthetically pleasing and acceptable to the community. So it is necessary. And as I was explaining to the wife when we were stuck in traffic with all the trucks on the expressway, is that while you're upset with the truckers, one of them is carrying out toilet tissue. So you have to keep that in mind. The function they serve is invaluable to us, and we've got to work together to make it all move smoothly, so to speak. Yeah. And they play a vital role in the function of this city.
Great.
And being a Georgia Studies teacher, I'll tell you, that's one of our major transportation systems, which is our highway. And so if we can get to the port and get somebody to get that stuff in and get it off the ships and put it on those trucks, we'd be all the happier. So I'm just going to hang up on that one. So awesome. Right. Awesome. Mr. Turner.
Mr. Knight, you still have your hand up? Do you have another point?
Well, actually, I just want to echo exactly what Councilwoman Grimes said, as well as Councilman Clanton and the Mayor Pro Tem. The Industrial Council absolutely does want to make these things look good. We recognize that they are there at the tolerance and sufferance of City Council and the residents, and we do want to make them look attractive. And the additional regulation is needed. And actually, I do have a proposal for a little bit extra, which I don't think is in your current draft, which would be not only to prohibit chain link and wooden fences, and not only to require that the fences be opaque and 10 feet tall, but to also require that they be of the same material and appearance as what you see with both S&W, that top photo you have, and Encore Recycling. Those fences are made of metal. They're made of corrugated metal, and they're not painted. The finish is baked on, I think in the nature of enamel, so that they never have to be painted, and they always look pretty darn good. And I think that actually is a superior standard. And if that's what we're going for, then I would suggest respectfully that might as well be thrown into the ordinance too.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, these are all good ideas. Yeah, in fact, like I said, the proposal we have so far is that these would be 10 foot tall. They would look similar, or you're saying actually be the same type of fencing as you see in these two examples. We also talk about vegetation between the street and the fence being 100% evergreen, and of course being at least 6 foot high or 2-inch caliber when they're planted, and of course that the buffers be mulch, water to maintain where necessary. And I know that's another issue. We've seen efforts at putting buffers on the outside, but they haven't been maintained very well. And of course, making sure that all these existing lots upgrade to this effort in 2025. And like I say, it sounds like we're also talking about adding a provision for private inspection of these things that would be at the cost of the owner. And that would just be done on a regular basis as we go forward. So Council Member Grimes, you had your hand up first, I think.
Yes, you have some people in the waiting room. Can you check that?
Oh, Angela, you're hosting. Can you let them in?
Thank you.
All right, sure. Are they all in, Angela?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay, yeah, I see no one outstanding.
Okay. You see someone,
Yeah,
Councilman Grimes or Councilman Grimes?
I'm getting text from someone.
Oh, you're getting texts.
Cheryl. I just let a Cheryl in.
Okay. Well, I know she was on earlier. She must have lost connection earlier. Okay, Councilmember Clanton, I know you had your hand up too.
Yeah, my only comment is regarding the last item. All existing parking lots would be upgraded to this new standard no later than January 1, 2025. I just think that's too far out into the future.
Okay.
You know, I would like to see that a lot closer, particularly for the new ones that are, I mean, for the
Existing ones. Mm-hmm.
for the existing ones. I mean, because again, you know, this is what 2018 since we had this ordinance, and so
Right.
you know, I think they had opportunity. I'm willing to do something that's reasonable, but you know, 2025,
It's way
I
out
don't
there.
think it would address. It's way too far in the future.
Well, with Mr. Knight, do you have any ideas on that? I mean, is there an earlier date that might be acceptable to the council or up there, or your this interests that have these lots?
That is something I believe that we'll have to defer to city council about, sir.
Okay.
I would suggest that it would be reasonable to at least give the existing lots adequate time to actually get the things to find out about this new ordinance, about the change.
Right. And get the fencing installed and all that.
And they're going to have to go measure their property. They're going to have to figure out how much fencing they need. And plus, with the problems that we have with the pandemic and the supply chain, Lord only knows chain choke points. Lord only knows just how available this fencing is right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suggest that all of those things be factored in, and that, you know, at least say until what, January 1st, 2023, maybe, if that's acceptable.
Okay.
At least give everybody.
I can maybe do you one better, Mr. Knight. What about if we look at the items on this list and we timestamp the items as opposed to the entire ordinance? So, for instance, like the chain link fences and stuff like that we know that may take some additional time. We can set that out a little bit further. But items like the evergreens, 6 feet, you know, at least we can start the process. So something we can have there that's showing that they're in the process of coming into compliance. Because again, it is about look and feel, and you know, and also now the part, I don't know if it's in there, but they have to also the amount of gravel that should be on the ground should be up to par, and the detention or retention ponds should be in place. All those things should be in place. And the people that have been around since 2018, and especially the folks that are new, which hopefully we won't have too many more new ones but they should already have this done, you know, some of these items. So I don't know what the gravel supply chain look like. So you know, you guys might could address that more. I don't want to make it impossible for somebody to to come into compliance. You know, I want us to work together, but I just think 2025 is way too far. Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Grimes, you had your hand up again?
Well, no.
Oh, okay. All right. All right.
And let me just add to that, and that is that with all the quarries around Lithonia and Stonecrest, we should not have a gravel supply issue. But I do concur that 2025 is probably too far out. And if we can get someone who can monitor this, and I know we talked about the staffing issue, so that's something that we're going to have to deal with as a city in terms of staffing personnel in the enforcement area to make sure that they do come into compliance within a reasonable amount of time. And if we have to find a way to cause them to be self-monitoring, we have to monitor the self-monitors. But I just want to make it known that I do support bringing this date up, make it less than 2025, such that we can get this done in a reasonable amount of time. And 2023 suggested by Mr. Knight, that'll give them with a year and a half, could be 2 years, to get the process and explain why they cannot meet the deadline if they are unable to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, let's move on to the next item unless there are any other comments about gravel parking. Next one is standardization of definitions. And honestly, this is kind of an ongoing thing. I mean, if you haven't noticed, a lot of the text amendments that we've been dealing with have updated definitions going on. And honestly, at the end, I think this is something that we're probably going to have more of a major housekeeping item going on here. I brought this table up before with the council, but we're dealing with inconsistent language. For example, the use table may say dog grooming, supplemental may say pet grooming. The definition may say dog grooming or daycare, and then the matching update may say pet grooming or pet daycare. So it's making sure that all these definitions are in place, that everything's the same. And I can tell you, when you deal with a lot of lawyers, which I often do in zoning administration, language is important. How you define something and how it goes in there, it needs to be consistent in what's going on. And we've talked about new definitions being in place, things like breweries, community living arrangement, distillery, all these kind of going on there. I recently got a report from one of my colleagues who's been helping me with this whole effort. I might share this real briefly. I don't expect anyone to read it, but right now, but I certainly would be glad to pass it around after the meeting if people are interested. But I got a Word document, I think you can all see here, which is definition research on exactly what are the different things we saw. And some of the issues we saw were dealing with, first of all, should the identifier come first or second? I think for example, it should be consistent in the way we do it. It should say sawmill, temporary or portable, as opposed to temporary or portable sawmill, and be consistent how that's done. We also have issues here in the proposed use table on what's going on of terms not being defined, partially defined, or not defined the same in different parts of the code. And so my colleague, Paul Coulter, has actually gone through for each of the areas, both agricultural, residential, institutional, public, and identified, where there's no definition in place or there are different terms being used. You dealt with institutional public uses, government facilities, for example, specialized schools aren't defined. You get into commercial and there's all kinds, there's a whole litany. I think you got here 43 different terms that are either not defined and need to be checked or things need to be upgraded. So this is just to give you the sense that what our intention is to make sure, and here in industrial, we've got 25 of those, and then communications 3, and even wireless communication had 1. But our goal is to go through and offer updated definitions on all these different terms, make sure that everything is consistent in place and what's going on. So I just want to kind of give you some background on that. I don't expect to be, unless you have any questions about what we're doing, but I just want to let you know that we are doing this in the background. And at the end, our goal is to make sure that the code is consistent and legally defensible. I mean, that's always the biggest concern I have, is when you have different terms for the same thing. And I can tell you a lawyer will rip you apart if they're not consistent as we go forward. Finally, I wanted to just touch upon this item, I-20 overlay design standards, and this is really more of a discussion item. This is the last thing of the evening. I know it's getting late. I don't want to hold everybody up, but the current code references I-20 design guidelines, but none, as far as I know, the few months I've been here, none are really adopted. I haven't seen an I-20 design guideline manual or book or anything I'm supposed to follow. And there's even a section 3.3321 in the I-20 overlay that says the planning director or designee is authorized to create, administer, or amend design guidelines, and that even the design standards are hereby part of this division and shall be amended from time to time. And there are even references, for example, in like street lights and furnishing section of the code that says, look at the guidelines, but it doesn't offer any details. It just says, look at the guidelines, which don't exist. So I know when I brought this before with the work session with the council that you all were interested in bringing adopting some form of design guidelines to go into it. So my first question may be a moot one, but should they be created, or should the reference to the guidelines be deleted? Because I can tell you right now in the code, you do have regulations in place, not guidelines, for architectural design, landscaping, sidewalks, street lights, street interparcel access, multimodal access, sign regulations, and shared parking already in the I-20 overlay. The question is, do we want to add something separate that are true guidelines, similar to what you see now with the Stonecrest area overlay? You have a separate book that's adopted in there. And what, if so, what should that cover? I mean, do we start with the Stonecrest overlay and just kind of, see, okay, is there something we can adapt or change? But, I don't want to just take the Stonecrest overlay and say, oh yeah, let's adopt it here. Because I can tell you, I've already had some issues with the way it's written. But I just want to find out what level of look, feel, character do we want to have for I-20? And the other point is, if these are guidelines and dealing with architecture and all that, is there a standard or a look that we should have there? I think the Stonecrest area overlay looked a lot about how the mall was built. There was a lot of the signage and everything. It looked a lot like how Stonecrest Mall was built. What would be the standard for I-20 design guidelines that should be in place? Or should there even be a strong architectural standard that's in place? So I know it's a lot of questions, but I just want to throw that on the floor and get some comments or concerns. Or if you don't have any questions or comments or concerns about it, I'll take a first stab at all this and come back with you with some details. But I did want to open up the floor for discussion and see what your all thoughts were.
I'll take a shot at it.
Okay. All right.
When you come down I-20, particularly into the Stonecrest area, there is a certain look and feel we had desired to portray. And I was under the impression that we had some of that spelled out in terms of the design guidelines versus the other standards that you pointed out. So it's almost as if this needs to be a separate initiative if it does not exist, because it's going to take a lot to put that in place in terms of the design guidelines. So I would support creating it versus taking it out.
Okay.
Even if it winds up being a standalone, it definitely needs to be there because we want to get that particular look and feel when you are east of 285, although you don't get into Stonecrest until you get to Miller Road, but you still want to get that I-20 overlay feel of someplace that's special and has a particular design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was something I know when we were discussing in previous conversations about the CID and all that. A lot of CIDs actually work on what I call sort of gateway improvements along the interchange and how the interchange looks. And right now, you come into Stonecrest, I really don't see that same level of landscaping and stuff like you see, for example, going up to Gateway 85 CID area or around Perimeter or any of that. And so that can go a long way toward it. Of course, that's separate from design guidelines per se, but nonetheless, it does get into the question of what is the impression you want to have as people come into the area, and what sets that definition? What is the look and feel that you want to have? And I do think it's very important. I mean, aesthetics are very, very important to a community.
We're only 4 years old, and while we want to get there in a hurry, I think if we rush it, it could be a big mistake to put something up that you regret and want to take down next week. So I think it's got to be well considered.
Well,
some things have been, matter of fact, before we were incorporated during the process, there was a committee that looked at some suggestions, and they were just that, suggestions. And I think when DOT get into redesigning some of the bridges, that might be an opportunity for us to participate. But I think to rush into it would be a big mistake as well. But the conversation needs to be going on as to what do we want it to look like, and make sure it's well thought out, because that's not something you just put in place.
Throw together in a couple of weeks. Yeah. Okay. So maybe more of the work item comes out of this, that we initiate a study or look or committee to look at this closely. Of course, I'm sure when I say committee that the city manager is wincing right now, thinking, oh no, not another committee, but we do need, or maybe we use another committee to look at this. I don't know. It's really good to Councilmember Clanton.
Yeah, I'm here. So so the thing that caught me was when you said that there was there's a reference to the I-20 overlay, but there's there's no text.
Yeah, there's no design guideline manual. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm looking at the DeKalb County Muni Code. They do mention the I-20 overlay as well as what they call in and I'm assuming this is the same area, but it's called the I-20 Corridor Compatible Use Overlay District. And then later on, they refer to it as the I-20 Corridor Overlay District, which I'm assuming is may or may not be what we're talking about here. But this seemed to have been some attention was paid to it in 2017. So I don't know how up to date it is. It does mention things such as principal uses and structures and on and on and on, prohibited uses. They also specify the coverage. They got an area that's the district boundaries and maps. So they got they're basically saying it's comprised of 6 different areas. But more to the point is, I'm in agreement with you. I hope this don't sound bad to our listeners, but I could care less whether our design guidelines are attached to the I-20 overlay, as long as what you and Councilman George Turner has said, as long as we have some design guidelines that we can, that we can point to, and that is satisfactory to the look and feel that we're looking for. And so we've all often said that I-20 is like one of our biggest sellers in the city of Stonecrest, so when people come through here, they should have a certain look and have enough, it should look well enough that a person would be interested in leaving the expressway to come into our communities. And the other thing I would love to have, which is not on this topic, is some DOT marking, GDOT markings that at least say Stonecrest,
yeah,
anything,
yeah.
Panola Road, Stonecrest, or anything. I mean, I know the toil that went into getting the Arabian Mountain information added. I know it doesn't go without cost, but I think that's a cost that we should definitely go ahead and absorb and get something done with our signage off of I-20 at some point in time. But yes, I'm in agreement with you both.
One thing that you kind of brought to my attention is the fact that, in the way that, this is borrowed language primarily from DeKalb County. I'm curious if they've got a set of design guidelines in place that I'm just haven't seen yet. I don't know. Mr. Knight, I know you're very familiar with the county code. Are you aware of any design guidelines that the county has for the I-20 corridor?
No,
is there
sir,
anything out there?
I'm not. And in the context of the way that the overlay codes evolve in the county, it's not all that surprising. For example, if you go back to the previous code, the current code for DeKalb County, I think, was adopted in 2015. And the previous code was in 1999. That code, as Mr. Jordan Kelly will confirm, actually had a text provision authorizing the Border Commission, or purporting to create the Arabian Mountain overlay, but there was no map ever adopted. So from a legal standpoint, there was never any overlay until the city was created, and then both a text and a map was adopted. Somewhat similarly, the Stonecrest overlay was created, I believe, somewhere around 2001. And it was not until 2008 that the planning staff asked City Council to adopt the design guidelines, which before then had just been private guidelines. So in that context, it doesn't really surprise me that no guidelines were ever for the I-20 overlay, especially since, to my knowledge, there were never any private guidelines as a basis for adoption, unlike the
night.
Right, gotcha.
Yes.
This is good. You got your hand up, and do you have a comment about the I-20 design guidelines?
I was just thinking that since Stonecrest is such a new city, when we travel, say like I'm driving up to New York, you always want to do a design that captures the heart of people. And when I say that, it'll be an unforgettable stop coming through Stonecrest.
Right.
It'll be a massive
landmark.
Yeah. When you talk about aesthetics and cosmetic looks, you want things that people won't forget. And when they're traveling or coming through or even thinking of moving here, they'll say, you know, Stonecrest had an awesome welcoming. Do you want a welcome center when people are coming through? There are so many, if I drive up 95, I love to stop in Maryland. They have a big welcome center. They have a lot of places to eat there. It's right off the expressway. So I'm just thinking things that people won't forget, and they'll come back over and over and over. So I'm not a designer, so I can't tell you
Right.
how to lay the concrete or anything like that. But
Right.
you want something unforgettable. And there's certain places that I like to stop through when I'm traveling, or, you know, even if we wanted to move somewhere else, there's something that's going to capture the attention of people.
Right. Okay, so I'm hearing there's definite interest in this all doing something, but it's not something we necessarily want to rush into. We want to make sure it's done right. You know, I think this has really become more of a to-do item than an immediate fix in the code, but it is something we don't want to let drop, and it's certainly something I think that we need to, you know, look at and keep. But particularly, I mean, honestly, my fear is, you know, the GDOT improvements on the I-20, I-285 interchange are going to happen pretty quickly. And my concern is that we're coming in after the fact. I mean, they've already kind of designed what's going to happen there. Well, they have already designed what's going on in there. And I kind of feel like it'd be nice to get something in place soon so that we can make sure that the improvements are done in a fashion that, again, is, you know, a landmark for the city and is and look and feel we want to have. So I don't think it's a to-do item we want to wait on too long, but nonetheless, it's not something we want to rush. So, well, that's really everything I wanted to cover tonight. And I just want to give you one last comment. Are there any other items, questions, or comments you want to offer before we adjourn? Okay. Well, I appreciate all the input. It's been very good tonight. And I hope you all have enjoyed this as much as I have in terms of talking about the code and making sure we're you know, being as transparent as we can as we move forward in this. And until next time, you know, have a good evening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.